Today's show is sponsored by the ABV Barrel Shop. The ABV Barrel Shop is located in the St. Louis metro community of Arnold, Missouri, and is the world's first single-barrel-only liquor store. This store is owned and operated by Steve Akeley and Jim Fosnot. Get signed up for their email distribution list to find out when the store will be opening, what their hours will be, and most importantly, what they will have in inventory at abvbarrelshop.com. We are also sponsored by The Bar to Go. The Bar to Go offers a fully customizable carrying case that allows you to take your favorite distilled spirits or cocktail ingredients with you. Whether you're looking for yourself, a customized gift, or logo items for your business or event, The Bar to Go can help. Check them out at thebartogo.com. Use the number 2 when you type out The Bar to Go. Did you know Neely Family Distillery now ships its popular distilled spirits directly to you? To order, simply call 859-394-3258. Tell them the ABV Network sent you. And now, on to the show.
Let's drink!
Welcome to the Bourbon Daily, the podcast about everything bourbon delivered to you every day of the week. Today on the show, we talk with Derrick Mancini of Quincy Street Distillery. My name is Steve Akeley. Please join me in welcoming my special guest, Mr. Derrick Mancini. Hey, Derrick, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Steve?
Doing well as well. Absolutely. So for anybody listening to this, before we talk about you, and we want to get to know you a little bit here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, aside from the business, we'll talk about the business and get into all that after the break.
All right, sure. I am somebody who has always been interested in food and beverage, and I've made beer and wine as a hobbyist for years and years and years. But I did not come from this through a more normal professional route, or even just because of my interest in spirits and whiskey in particular. I came about sort of by accident. I'm actually a retired physicist.
Okay.
And I worked for 20 years for the federal government in one of their Department of Energy laboratories outside of Chicago. And while I was doing that, I had a summer home in Southwest Michigan, and I was interested in making wine. In fact, before I went to grad school, I looked into seriously starting a meadery out in the West Coast where my folks were living. And I had that summer home, and I'd always been interested in the idea of having a winery. And so we thought, well, maybe we'll start a winery so that if we retire up there one day, we would have this winery. Mm-hmm. And I really studied hard about how to do that and what was up in doing growth of grape and making wine in Southwest Michigan, and determined you can't really make good wine in Southwest Michigan most years. It's just highly variable weather. There are other parts of Michigan that work out better, and particularly for vinifera. And so I came up with the idea of doing something like they do in Portugal, which is they like to use the off years. They have the same variability of weather because they're right on the Atlantic. They use those off years to do distillation. And people familiar with that port, they know declares vintages, for example. Well, many farm wineries would make aguardente, which is their sort of like grappa. Mm-hmm. And so you would distill on those off years. And then it turned out that was also the first state putting together a really advantageous, inexpensive permit for craft distilling. So I learned about craft distilling there, and came up with the idea of doing a distillery winery. And that's what we were going to do. We were going to do wine in the good years, and the off years we're going to make grappa and an American brandy. And also it was an area where a lot of people were, you could grow barley in the northern part of the state. And so we thought we would actually do malt whiskey in as well. That was the main idea. And then we spent like 4 years trying to get this location set up in an area near where we were living. And the town we were interested in was a tourist town, was not very cooperative. And so while all that was happening, it turned out that a building about a block from my house in Riverside, Illinois, got renovated and was suitable for doing a distillery. And a friend of ours said, why don't you open your winery up here? But it really didn't make sense to do a winery in northern Illinois. And so we thought about doing the distillery in that location to basically learn about it. So we're going to do it very small. And then we switched up completely what we were going to do. And I was doing all this while I was still getting very senior doing my research at the laboratory. So it was a part-time activity for me to try to set this up. I had a very good young guy who had just done a little bit of distilling with another company, and they spent their time helping me set things up, initially part-time. And then after a few years in was when I ended up retiring from the laboratory, because I had been there 20 years. And so I ended up working full-time on the distillery. And that was sort of how I transitioned from this career in science and ended up with a distillery a block from my house in the town I was living.
Nice. You can walk to work. So
I can walk to work. Yeah.
That's a good thing.
So walk away.
Tell us a little bit, what are your interests outside of spirits and all that kind of stuff? Is there anything that you like? Woodworking, sports, anything?
Yeah, I have a very broad range of interests. I always have, I've done videography and film, and I did all these things when I was in college too. I do have my degrees in physics and material science, but I also have a degree in history. So I have a real strong interest in history. And in fact, that was sort of became part of what I was going to do with the distillery in the end, because we decided to incorporate historical ideas and things into how we were going to do things with the distillery. So I have an interest in that. I've been cooking since I was in high school for myself, and became very interested in doing gourmet cooking of all different countries. And so basically, my wife sort of claims I just don't have a hobby I don't like. So, and I've always been sort of doing them at the same time. Back in the day when I was in grad school, you can't do this anymore, but I was in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a great beer drinking town.
Sure. College party town. Yeah.
Exactly. And I worked in this laboratory out in the middle of the cornfields in Stoughton, which is south of Madison. And we would actually do big batches of beer and eventually mead right in the laboratory, which there's no way they'd let you do that anymore. But back then, weren't so tight about the rules, and so I was just making batches every week, and it was there's no better way to sort of do all this kind of stuff than just to be doing it. And then because I was there and there's all these other grad students all working there, you're sharing this thing with everybody. You have this experience of, it's not just something you're doing on your own, it's a highly social experience. And so it just became part of what I did. So I first started mead making before that. And so that I'd probably been making mead off and on as a hobby for 40 years. And in fact, I've been wanting to still open up the meadery. And I'm still thinking I might eventually do that.
That could possibly happen, huh? That's cool.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of hobbies and stuff like that. Does any of them involve collecting anything? Are you a collector of anything?
Yeah, sadly, it's true.
Oh, okay, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I've been a collector since I was a kid. In fact, when I was really young, I was collecting both coins and stamps, sort of the classic things kids would do.
Yep.
But I got very serious about it for a while. And before I went to college, I was actually, me and a buddy were going to all the coin shows, had become part-time coin dealers. To belie my age, I was buying bulk silver like mad just before that crazy silver explosion back in the 70s, and that helped finance my first year of college.
Nice.
So it paid off. And I got, I really, that wasn't the only thing I collected. If you look in my home, it's luckily it's not like, it doesn't look like I'm a pack rat too much, but because everything's on nice display. But my wife and I, when we got married, we were living at the time in Scandinavia, and we were collecting pieces of the Royal Danish Tranquebar, China, antiques every time we would go over to Copenhagen, because that's something she had inherited from her grandmother. And if you look in my dining room, I probably have the single largest collection in the country of Tranquebar dishes.
Wow.
And then I like glassware. I'm fascinated by it, which is great because I'm interested in cocktails. So I have this collection of Scandinavian glassware. Many of them are rare sets from the 60s and 50s. And I have like very complete sets I put together. In fact, I'm dangerous because if I see something that looks like a great value on eBay, I'll just go around grabbing everything that's a good value on eBay, and it will simply disappear in a few weeks from eBay for the rest of eternity. So I did that with a few odd things. As I said, I was interested in photography when I was a kid, and so I started by using a little Yashica mat, twin lens reflex, and I loved using twin lens reflexes. So there was a point a few years back where all the Mamiya twin lens reflex 330s were sort of available in all the lenses, and I just started buying everything like mad. So now I have like 4 Mamiya 330s and every single lens Mamiya made for them, and you can't find those anymore because I think I bought them all. So
they're out there. They're just through you now.
yeah, just to me. No, but you get them while they're cheap, and so these things appear. But that once people don't realize that even though it's a worldwide market, the things on there can really you can grab those things. And I guess maybe I'm always aware of that. And so if something really strikes my fancy and you realize you can get them cheaply, you go, okay, let's grab a bunch of these things while you can, because they can go away and they're gone after that. That even intersected back about a year ago or so with my distillery, where I noticed there was this particular kind of cut crystal that you could get relatively cheaply called Dorflinger. And Dorflinger was famous crystal from Philadelphia, one of the most famous American crystal manufacturers. And I hadn't really paid attention to American crystal, but I said, oh, that'd be interesting maybe to have at the distillery for display. So I started buying all these coupes of cut crystal in a particular pattern until I bought everything that was available on eBay. And then it was really cool because I found out there was this classic drink that was created in New York that they named after the Dorflinger, which I made the spirits for, gin and absinthe. And it was a real killer of a drink. So we put it on the menu and we put the Dorflinger crystal up for display. And if you buy like the double size of that drink, we'll serve it in this 19th century Dorflinger crystal, which is worth far, far more than drink is. So
yeah. Well, that's very cool.
So that kind of stuff. And I'm constantly doing that. So you let people know about my secret. Yeah, I collect like it.
You collect, yeah. Last getting to know you question, and then we'll have to take a break. But last getting to know you question, as a history buff, someone who loves history,
yes.
What's the best place in the U.S.? And you can only name one. You're gonna have to stick to one here. For a history buff, where should you go? Where's the number one place to go to try? Because as I'm thinking about it, I like to travel. Philadelphia stands out, Boston stands out, Virginia, even out west. If you go to like South Dakota, you've got all that great Wild West history. What's the place to go as a history buff if you're wanting to take a trip?
Oh, that's a terrible question.
Yeah, it's a terrible question because you only get one.
Yeah, exactly. Because the correct answer, I should say, is Riverside, Illinois, because you'll find out later why. But I won't say that one because we're going to talk about it anyway. So I'm going to talk about it anyway.
Okay.
So I'm going to say something that may not be one that I'm as familiar with, but the couple of times I visited there, I felt like, I really want to come back to walk in the shadow of history. And that's Philadelphia. I have to say, I don't know the city very well. But every time I walk around there, you feel the history of the creation of this country. It's just all around you, and the place physically is one of the oldest cities that there is, and it's all these little nook and crannies you have to find. So that's maybe aspirational. I would like to go back to visit as a history buff to see it more.
I think that's the right answer then. Yeah.
So that's but you forced me. So
I forced you. Yeah, I only gave you one. There were some other options out the DC.
I'm gonna go every place.
Yeah. All right. Well, good to get to know you a little bit. We'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about Quincy Street Distillery. We'll do that in just a few. Let's talk about the people who make these shows happen. First up is the ABV Barrel Shop. The ABV Barrel Shop is owned and operated by Steve Akeley and Jim Fosnot in the greater St. Louis area. It is the most unique shopping experience in the world of bourbon, as the ABV Barrel Shop only focuses on single barrels. We aren't open just yet, but our plan is to have the most diverse single barrel offerings from our many friends in the world of bourbon. By signing up for a weekly email, you will know our entire inventory we have on hand. In addition to single barrels, we'll have a tasting bar and a gift shop featuring logo merchandise for both the shop and the ABV network, as well as a full curriculum of bourbon education classes. Additionally, we'll use the gift shop to feature products from our partners in the world of bourbon, companies like Art Eatable Chocolates and Old Man Bay Signs. Head over to ABV Barrel Shop to sign up for our email and text distribution list so you can stay in the know. Hi, this is Steve Akeley, owner of the ABV Network. We're sponsored by the Stave and Thief Society. This is where you, a bourbon enthusiast, can expand your knowledge and emerge a bourbon steward. In 2017, I completed my Executive Bourbon Steward certification. It's the most comprehensive bourbon certification program available and connects you with an expansive network of bourbon enthusiasts and professionals. Check out the full listing of in-person and online certifications and join the society today by enrolling at staveandthief.com. Okay, let's talk about Neely Family Distillery. In 2018, I met Royce Neely at an industry event. He started appearing on our shows, and we became friends during my frequent visits to Kentucky. Today, he's leading the way for young distillers making their mark on the bourbon industry. A visit to Neely Family Distillery combines family history, a look at what makes their products unique, and of course a tasting through their whiskeys, moonshines, and creams. Check them out at NeelyFamilyDistillery.com and visit them in Sparta, Kentucky.
Hello, this is Matt Rainey, and you are listening to The Bourbon Daily. One day when I grow up, I'm going to grow a big boy beard, just like Colonel Steve.
All right, everybody, welcome back. My name is Steve Akeley. I'm here with Derrick Mancini of Quincy Street Distillery today. And Derrick, tell us a little bit about Riverside and the history here that you've been leading up to. You kind of teased it in the first segment,
yeah,
so
sure.
Let's hear what's going on there.
So Riverside is this little village that's just about 15 minutes outside of Chicago on the train line. But it's a very unique place. It was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, the guy who did places like Central Park and essentially created landscape architecture in America. And the interesting thing is, the reason why I know about this place is that when I was dating my wife, who was living in Chicago at the time, she's a writer, but she was doing the photos guide for Chicago. So she had to rewrite or update the walking tour of this little town. So she took me on a date, the walking tour of the little town. And I grew up in the suburb of New York on Long Island. And so I didn't really like suburbs. So I was like, okay, we'll go and do this. But she knew I'd like architecture and landscape architecture. So after we sort of did a walking tour, I made this remark to her that, this is a really interesting place. This might be the only suburb I would think I might live in someday. And that was because it was the first commercially planned suburb in the United States, and it was designed to look like an English park. So it's filled with trees and big setbacks, and it was designed to have all the modern conveniences of its day, like paved streets and raised sidewalks and gas lit throughout and a central water tower. And it has all these little curvy streets because it's meant to look like paths going through a park. And there's really nothing like it. And it's still like that today. It's still gaslit. It's still all like that. It is literally a 19th century village preserved in time. It's sort of like one of those Twilight Zone episodes where the commuter gets off the train and suddenly he's back in the 19th century. It really feels like that. And so she stored that little information in her head. So a few years later, when we decide we have to move back from Sweden to Illinois, she says, oh, and yeah, we can live in Riverside. So that's how we ended up here. So the interesting thing about this is that the place started selling off all these lots to build these beautiful homes in 1870, 1871, and the Chicago fire happened. When the Chicago fire happened, it bankrupted the company. As a result, people weren't building for a while, but they continued to buy lots and build over the next 100 years. And if you drive around the town, it's really eclectic. You see a giant 1880s mansion next to a little bungalow from the 1920s, next to a 1970s ranch house. It's all mixed up, but all in this little English park setting that's been designed by a landscape architect, and all gaslit throughout. It's very historic. And the downtown has historic buildings. In fact, when it was created originally, it was not only a commercially planned suburb, it was meant to be a major 19th century resort town. It had a giant hotel on the river. And so the place just reeks of history. In fact, the entire village in the 1970s was declared a National Historic Landmark. So and it's got a couple of famous homes by Frank Lloyd Wright, including something called the Coonley Estate that's here. It's really a very interesting place. So it just drips with history. And so we bought a nice little place to live here and raise our daughter here. But the place also feels like a town from a time long ago. The way the people interact, I swear, I believe what it is the physical character of the place creates its social character. I think it's something that was understood by these landscape architects, is that they were creating an environment, and the environment molds the people. I have never been in another suburb where it feels like you're in a little old suburb from decades and decades ago, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody's interacts with everybody in a way I've never seen anyplace else. And that's sort of a lost lesson, I think, for us. I think if you create grids and put everybody in their little sugar cookie cutter homes and do that, they all box themselves away and they don't become part of a community to the degree they can, because they have their little house and they sort of atomize there. So it's really amazing. It's an amazing.
So if we're coming to visit you at the distillery, is there a neat place to stay, like a historic place to stay or something like that in Riverside, or do we have to fan out and spread out a little?
Yeah, sadly, no, there's no place to stay.
That's my fear. Small town a lot of times doesn't have that.
It doesn't have it. I've part of why I built the distillery is I wanted to create a destination business for our village, because it's this wonderful little village, but people don't really come in from the outside. In fact, because it's dark and it's got these curvy streets and everything else, we sort of think of it, it's a little bit like the Roach Motel. You can get in, but you can't get out. Your GPSs don't work. It's really very funny. But the interesting thing to me is, there's, even though it once was this place that was meant to be a resort, there's no bed and breakfast, there's no hotel or anything in the village proper. Right across the river is Ogden Avenue, which is the endpoint of Route 66 in Chicago, going into Chicago. And so there's a whole bunch of these old funky motels and right nearby, but they're funky. I don't know how many people would like their friends to go stay there. So you can do that. But on the other hand, it's actually very easy to get to if you're visiting Chicagoland, because we're right on one of these train lines. And as I said, there's these villages that dot all along the train line coming from Chicago all the way out to Aurora, Illinois, on this thing called the Chicago Quincy Burlington train line, which was this old railroad that went through the area, and the CBQ. And so you can be staying in Chicago and get into Union Station and take the train out to this little village, and you leave modern Chicago and walk out into this little 19th century village right there. And it's really pretty cool. And we're a block and a half from the train. Yeah. So in fact, we see the train going by all the time. So I would say it's worth the visit, but you have to go find this place. It's something
you got to work for it. What about I would assume at the holidays it's got to be pretty spectacular walking into this historic village, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's very quiet. We do have every year. We used to have a holiday stroll. The pandemic was prevented that for a year. And again, it's basically people doing things walking around downtown. But it's very private. You have some people put lights up and everything else, but it's a little low key.
Okay.
So the place is a really unusual place because of what was built there, but it's always an unusual place. It's an unusual place from the point of view of nature too, because we're surrounded by other, by big malls and all kinds of different suburban communities. Immediately to the east of us is Berwyn, which is this gridded community. It's filled with the classic Chicago bungalows, and you go up north about 15 minutes, you'll be at Oak Park, which is a city unto itself. I mean, there's stuff all around us, and then we're this funny little quiet enclave, which is sitting in the nook of the oxbow of the Des Plaines River. So two sides of us are defined by the Des Plaines River, and then two sides of us are defined by these traffic thoroughfares, and it just sort of cuts us off from the outside world almost in a way. There's only a few streets that you can use to get in and out of the place.
Okay.
And but that location turns out to be really part of the history of the place, not only for what it is now and what it was created for in 1869, but what the place was before the state was even formed. Let me tell you a little bit about that, because that actually ties to the distillery, because a lot of our branding is tied to the history of the area.
Okay.
The state's founded in 1818, but long before the state is founded, this location, the oxbow of the Des Plaines River, is only about a mile north from a place on the river called the Portage. And the Portage is famous because it's the location that you can connect between the east and west river systems in the U.S. for trade. And it was discovered by LaSalle. And once that happens, the French start using it, but it's always been used, of course, by the indigenous peoples for the fur trade industry. But this little oxbow Des Plaines River, this little location, was really important for the fur trade industry because it's where all the fords across the river were, and that became where all the Indian trails crisscrossed through because of the trade for fur, and that became all the first country roads. And so this location becomes the center of the fur trade industry when the French are here. Mm-hmm. And so they found the first town in the area, which is called Lyons today, but it was actually obviously named after Lyon, and it becomes this commerce center. And when the Louisiana Purchase happens and essentially America expands to take over the territories that the French claimed, then the American settlers take over the fur trade industry. So that's happening from 1818, when the state is founded, going forward, that fur trade industry essentially becomes subsumed by the various American settlers moving into the region. But they're still using this as the center of the fur trade industry. In fact, this oxbow is filled with a whole bunch of taverns and trade buildings. And in the 1820s, two fur traders from Michigan, Barnabas David Lawton, they come to the region to set up the trading post that will be located about probably thousands of feet south of the Portage. And that trading post will be named after them, known as the Lawton Trading Post. And these as fur traders, and the reason why they came here, as best we can tell, is because David Lawton was married to a Potawatomi princess, and she owned thousands of acres in the area. The Potawatomi, who had been allies to American settlers maybe for 100 years, are all throughout the Midwest, but they have a very large presence in this area. And so they set up this important trading post. And as best we can tell, they didn't set up their home right at the trading post. That makes sense. A fur trading post probably was also a tannery, and you don't want to live at a tannery. Right. So they set up their home at the location where we are now here in Riverside, but there was no Riverside at the time. But they set up where these other taverns probably were located, and they set up their home there, which became a tavern that was very typical for a merchant and became the most important tavern in the area, Lawton Tavern. And so this becomes the center for the American fur trade industry in the area as well. And the Lawton brothers are trading, and they are the people are coming to their tavern. But by the time you get to the 1830s, the fur trade is already dying out.
Yeah.
And so so what's happening? Well, people are still moving into the area, but they're coming in homesteading to start to do farming. And so that's not just true in this area in Illinois, it's true all throughout the Midwest. And because that's happening, they're starting to displace many of the indigenous peoples in the area. And this creates something that's euphemistically known as the Indian problem, because the white settlers are competing for the land. And in some places, what they decide to do is to, negotiate, or rather force many of the indigenous peoples to relocate to specific confined areas, which are known in many places as reservations. And that's done all around the states around Illinois in the Midwest, but not in Illinois. So Illinois does a very unusual thing. They decide they don't want to have reservations in the area. They also don't require that the indigenous peoples give up their land. But if they want to stay, they are required to essentially assimilate, right? Become citizens of the nation. They have to give up their tribal hegemony. If they don't want to give up their tribal hegemony, they're given the option instead to sell their lands and to relocate to the territories into one of the reservations being established there, the nearest being Iowa Territory. So that was the option. And if you couldn't sell your lands privately, the state would even purchase the lands from you. This was considered a more equitable approach than what the other states were doing by those in the state of Illinois. But of course, if you wanted to keep your lands and you wanted to keep your tribal hegemony, you weren't given that choice.
Yeah.
So what happens is a lot of the people who decide they don't want to give them the tribal hegemony try to keep their lands. And this is the beginning of what we call the Indian Wars in Illinois, 1832 to 1834, which is to force those tribes who decide not to take the deal to relocate to the territories in reservations. Now, why is that relevant to our story? Well, that's because the way they did this is they had the Illinois Volunteers organized under General Scott, and they set up by camping out at this location at the Oxbow of the Des Plaines River.
Yeah.
And that's called Scottswood today because of that. And which is sort of interesting because it's being done right next to these people who live here who are also fur traders, including indigenous peoples. And they go off and start having these battles to move these people into reservations. The most famous of these are with the Fox Indians, who are, the Fox Valley is named after them. They occupy the Fox and Mississippi Valley. They are warrior Indians, they are forest Indians, and they are led by a fierce, famous warrior chieftain named Black Hawk.
Sure. And
Black Hawk vows he's going to keep his lands. He fights ferociously to try to keep them, but he does lose, and he's moved off to the Iowa Territory. The next couple of years pass, and most of the other tribes are relocated. And then by this time, because they're in the middle of Iowa in a prairie, there's no forest and they don't farm, they've had a chance to regroup, and he tries to come back to retake his original tribal lands. And this will be the last battle of the Indian Wars. And so he comes back, he loses again, and this time Scott drives him off to the Kansas Territory reservation so that he can't get back. And that ends the Indian Wars in 1834. And how this brings us back to the story here is that when he does this, he sends the volunteers home, dissolves the army. And that means there's no standing army in the state of Illinois. And that means they violate federal law because all states have a standing army. And so Cook County has to form a militia. And when they go to form this militia, the first sheriff of Cook County sends a letter out saying all the able-bodied men are going to come to my home to form a militia. This was a guy, Steve Forbes, who was homesteading right here. And he was homesteading here because His wife was the sister of Barnabas Lawton's wife. So he was staying with his in-laws while he built his home.
Yeah.
Which means he was staying at Lawton Tavern, which means he had just invited all the able-bodied men in Cook County to a tavern. So they all show up, over 1,000 men, and they elect this guy, Jean-Baptiste Bourbon, to be the colonel of Cook County Militia. And then they want to celebrate. And we know all about this because Bourbon wrote about it in detail in his diary. And so they celebrate by making a punch, which is the most common way to drink spirits in the early 19th century. And a punch was just a mixture of tea, sugar, fruit juice, water, and spirit. And in this case, they made a lemon tea punch, and we note that because he wrote the recipe down. And it was a mixture of tea and bulk sugar and probably, we don't know for sure the spirit, but they made it, he said, in an empty bourbon barrel. And to keep the punch cold, they put it into the nearby spring Bonfontaine. And thereafter, the spring was known as Bourbon Spring. So there's this little historic site about 1,000 feet from our distillery near the river called Bourbon Spring, where there's a limestone cistern and a bronze plaque that enumerates it. And so Bourbon Spring turns out to be the name we took for the first bourbon we ever made.
Oh, cool. Cool.
And so the distillery, when we set it up, because of all this history, and then people don't know about this history. People know about Riverside, and they know about it being this late 19th century village, but almost nobody knows that this same location was central to the history of the state in its beginnings and central to the history long before the state existed. So we decided to be, as a distillery, all about historicity, about making historical style spirits, using historical methods, and then even all our branding is about local and regional historical people, places, and things. So that's what we did. And so originally, I didn't think I was going to be doing whiskeys, even though I drink them. I wasn't really planning to do it. It actually became the focus because historically, if you had a distillery in Illinois, the most likely thing you were going to probably make would have been whiskey. Mm-hmm. And most likely bourbon or rye. So that's what we were interested in doing. And so the very first thing we made was this Bourbon Spring bourbon. And it's unusual. And part of why it's unusual is because it's a style that was new at the time amongst craft distilleries, often referred to as baby bourbons. I don't know if you remember, but there was this thing called Hudson's Baby Bourbon coming out of New York around the time. It was very popular at the time. It was an all corn bourbon. It was aged in very small casks for only a few months. And it had a very unusual flavor profile. So I was aware of it and how it was made and what barrels they were using for it. And so we thought, well, this might be a good way to get into it business. And we weren't the only craft distillery thinking about that. But I decided to go do my research, as they say, and understand the history of bourbon in the area and the state, et cetera. And one of the things I learned was that the bourbon we drink today was not the bourbon that was originally made and drunk in America. Mm-hmm. That bourbon that you go and get in Kentucky today is not what the Kentucky distillers originally made. It was a different product.
Yeah.
And so we realized that this baby bourbon didn't have to just be a small barrel, short-aged whiskey. We could actually probably make something akin to what bourbon was originally. And so that's what we did. So that was going to be our signature spirit, and was in some ways, the very first thing we made, because the new make was the very first thing we sold. So it's a very high corn bourbon. It's 84% corn. And that represents our feeling that if you were in the Corn Belt in the 19th century and you're making whiskey, you were basically a corn farmer looking for a way to preserve the value of your corn, because you didn't have silos or anything like that. And a whiskey was one of the classic ways to preserve that value. And you probably make a very high corn product, because things like the malt you would use for the conversion, you probably have to purchase and be expensive. So we do 84% corn and 9% barley malt and 7% rye malt, both for the conversion and for some of the flavor profile. And that meant we were going to make a new make that, if unaged, would be technically today corn whiskey. And we wanted to make it as drinkable as possible, because we figured, look, most of the farm distillers, they didn't age their products. They would have just drunk that whiskey unaged.
Yeah.
And that's why it's still a style that's legally exists, is the unaged white corn whiskeys. And that meant it would also be something that could be aged for a shorter period of time, because it would have been drinkable even unaged. And one of the things you probably know by visiting this big distilleries who plan to age for 2, 4, 10, 20 years is that new makes are often extremely harsh and almost undrinkable.
Sure.
But that probably wasn't true for most of the products. They would try to make them drinkable without aging them because they drank most of them unaged. And so we perfected that. And then we said, okay, we're going to also age that to make this bourbon spring baby bourbon. And so that was therefore our third product. Our second product was actually to go ahead and take that same mash bill for that new make corn, and based on an 1819 recipe we found, make a gin off the corn liquor. So that was the second product. So right away, we were doing 3 historic spirits that represented something that you would expect to be made, where you had people out of necessity making spirit from corn mash. And that was a white corn whiskey, a gin off that white mash, and then this very young age bourbon.
Yeah.
So, do you want to take a break, or do you want?
No,
I know I've been going on long. I mean, this is the same spiel we give when we give our tours. So
we're getting the tour, all right.
Yeah.
But last question, because you've given us a good overview of company, the history, company history, as well as local history. You've talked about your products. The last question I've got for you is, what is the visitor's experience? So say we are coming up to visit you at your distillery. I'm not talking about the township or anything like that. Just talking about coming to see you. What's an experience of visiting your distillery like?
Okay, I can do that. Do I have enough time just to give you a little bit about what that bourbon is like before I go and do that, or?
Sure, quickly.
Okay, sure.
That's key. We have all right.
I lost track of time. So what's the bourbon is about? It's pot distilled. That's what you would have done in the early 19th century. It's we do double distillation, and more importantly, it would have been aged in a small barrel. Charred oak barrel, which is what they've been doing since they've been first making bourbons. But we know that those early bourbons in the 1810s, 20s, and 30s were actually aged in very small barrels. This is something people don't realize. In fact, the first standardized barrel for use comes later, and that's when they're using beer barrels, which are 30 gallons. The 40-plus gallon barrels really happen much later, when they start bottling whiskeys and aging whiskeys at distilleries, which is the 1870s and 80s. And when they describe the whiskey dealers in the 18 teens, they describe the whiskey as having a ruby color and a smoky flavor from the charred oak, which you don't see in a bourbon today. It turns out that smoky flavor comes from the char. You taste it in every charred oak barrel in the first few months, and then after 9 months to a year, it disappears. So this is just more evidence they were drinking these whiskeys really young. This is not a surprise. They were shipping the whiskeys in small barrel directly to tavern owners, because bottling didn't exist. And the tavern owners would do it when they thought they could sell it, which is when they had enough oak flavor, which was only in a few months. And then if you waited longer, you'd have so much angel share loss, you wouldn't want to do that, because the barrels are so small. So we think this bourbon spring is what the original early 19th century bourbons actually tasted like.
Okay.
And the interesting thing is, it is a very different kind of whiskey. And in fact, it took them another 50 to 80 years to figure out how to make a large barrel product that actually was comparable in its quality. It was a high quality whiskey. It was described as such. And so whatever it was that they were making back then, it was something that made bourbon have its original reputation. So we think we've done that, because we think it has that flavor profile. And also, when I go to contests, it's the bourbon that keeps winning me the gold medals. My straight's done in full-size barrels, which is the Lawton Brothers series, which is like late 19th century. They only win me silver medals. So because people don't know before they drink it what it is, and they go, wow, this is an amazing flavor. What is that? And you explain it's a 4-month-old bourbon in a small cask, and they're just flabbergasted. But we think that's the history of what bourbon was. All right, now,
very cool.
What are you going to do if you come visit us? We're a tiny, tiny little distillery, one of the smallest distilleries in Illinois, set in this little historic village. We're in a little 1912 arts and crafts industrial building that was part of what was called Auto Alley in that period of time. And you come in, the building's been renovated. It's a beautiful, 100% brick building. It's got 2 floors. It's got 2 rooms. It's got 2 bathrooms. It's got 2 kitchens. It's got 2 bathrooms. 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 It's got tiny little space. And back behind the 1920s style speakeasy bar is the distillery. You can see it through glass windows from your bar stool. And there's the little pot still. It's a Vendome copper pot still, 60 gallons, which would have been typical of a farmer's still in that period of time. And everything is lovingly made by hand right there. And we make 25 different spirits in that one tiny little place.
That's cool.
Including a vodka made from the faints from the bourbon. So there you go.
There you go. Sounds like something that our audience would be interested in. I'm interested in it. You and I have known each other actually for a long time.
Actually.
We've emailed back and forth for years at this point. We've never talked until today. So that's crazy, right? So yeah.
That's true.
So
and you haven't visited us yet. You really have.
No, I have not. I need to. I like road trips.
We do this great tour, and you end up tasting 8 or more of our spirits, and it's a really nice thing. And if you visit the cocktail bar, we do classic cocktails. We do things from 1862 Jerry Thomas Bar Guide all the way up to the present day, using our spirits, and do cocktail classes too. And everything we do, we sort of tie to history and historicity.
Very cool. Well, we're opening the new ABV Barrel Shop, which will be headquarters for the ABV network, and we're going to get you some of your products in there. So it'll be another opportunity too. In addition to getting them at the distillery, you can come by our place too. So.
We absolutely love to do that. Got to visit St. Louis again soon.
Heck yeah. All right. As we wrap this one up, Derrick, where can people find you? Anything you want to share? We're talking websites, social media, even your physical location, whatever is going to help you promote your business. We're more than happy to help.
Sure. Right in downtown Riverside, 39 East Quincy Street. That's where our name comes from. And you can find us on Facebook, Quincy Street Distillery. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, QS Distillery. And our website is quincy-street-distillery.com, and you'll find a lot about us and our brands and our spirits there. We are distributed in Illinois, New York, California, New Jersey, Florida, and most of the places through LibDib, which is a web-based distributor. Always looking for new retailers to take us on. And you can also mail order some of our products from ShotsBox. So you can find us, although it's not so easy sometimes to find us. And we only distribute maybe about 8 or 9 of our products, but we make 25. Everything from gin to absinthe, and as well as probably a dozen different whiskeys, because one of the things we do is different ages of the same whiskey, which have completely different age profiles. You can literally taste through what aging does to our whiskeys.
Very cool. All right. For me, I'm an easy guy to find. I'm at Steve Akeley on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. I've got a website, steveakeley.com. The important website, though, is abvnetwork.com. That's the one you got to check out, because everything that we do is out there. Previous shows, our blogs, so much more. Our shop, just check it out at abvnetwork.com. And of course, the ABV Barrel Shop, the thing that is coming soon. Check that out at abvbarrelshop.com. Sign up, get on our distribution list. That way you'll know exactly what's going on. Each week we'll be sending out an email that'll have what we have in stock. So please check that out again, abvbarrelshop.com. Also, just a quick reminder, if you like what we're doing, please give us a 5-star review and leave comments. It helps new people find the show. That's pretty important to us. And if you want to get involved, please head over to patreon.com/the ABV Network. Derrick, thanks so much for joining us today, man. We really appreciate it.
All righty. Hope again, talk to you again soon.
We'll get you back on.
You can talk. We'll later talk about the fact that even though we're the smallest distillery in the state, we make the oldest whiskeys in the state, because you can trade the baby, but we also have 7, 8, and 9-year-old whiskeys. So there you go. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll get you back on anytime you like. So that's for sure.
Take care.
Thanks, sir. Take care. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Peace. Before we finish the show, let's talk about some great companies that support the ABV network. First up is Moonshine Still Pro. Moonshine Still Pro has a full line of products to help the home distiller. Whether you want to experiment on the stove in your kitchen or you're looking for a bigger setup in your backyard, owner Russell Creed and his team can help. They have multiple still offerings, accessories, and even grain from their partners at Goldstone Mill to assist you in making whiskey on par with your favorite distillery. They can also help you with some fabricated parts you probably can't make yourself if you are attempting a DIY still project. Learn more or order your still or parts at moonshinestillpro.com. Another friend of ours is the Goldstein family at Goldstone Mill. The Goldsteins offer a variety of heritage and heirloom grains to make the finest whiskeys in the world. Plus, they are more than just a grain company. They are truly consultants to make sure the grains they are providing to you or your business meet your highest expectations. Additionally, they work with mills around the country, ensuring shipping is as low as possible for their customers. If you're a distillery, brewery, or even doing this at home, Goldstone can assist you. Check them out at goldstonemill.com, call them at 217-254-6613, or check in via email at hello@goldstonemill.com. Last but not least is the ABV Barrel Shop. While we don't get to play in the allocated bourbon game because we aren't selling the other products you have to do to get those, we do have access via our friendships in the bourbon industry to some really cool stuff. Have you ever seen your favorite craft distiller selling some really cool limited offerings only in their gift shop? I'm talking things like the hazmat offering Distillery 291 did for their 10th anniversary, or Neely Family Distillery's upcoming Papaw's birthday barrel. They don't have enough of it to send it out to distributors, so they only sell it via their gift shop. Well, companies like Distillery 291 and Neely Family Distillery have agreed to sell us 2 or 3 cases of these offerings moving forward, meaning our store will have the access to some of the rarest whiskeys in the world. Way more difficult to come by than the allocated bourbon offerings with a national release. Yes, they will be extremely tough to come by, but if you're a customer of our store, you'll have a chance to get them. Get signed up for our email or text list over at abvbarrelshop.com so you don't miss out.
The Bourbon Daily is part of the ABV Network. For more information or to become a sponsor, please visit abvnetwork.com. Thanks for listening and cheers.
This has been a Steve Akeley production.